The clinking of champagne flutes abruptly stopped when my brother Aidan tapped his glass. "If I could have everyone's attention," he boomed, his voice echoing a little too loudly in the hired hall. He beamed, his arm around his wife Sophia, who was cradling their newborn son, Sam. "Today is about family, about new beginnings." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before landing squarely on me. "And speaking of family, my name is Tessa, and that sun-drenched afternoon, at my nephew's christening, was the day my own family publicly disowned the life I was building. I remember the scent of lilies and baby powder, the pastel decorations, the forced smiles of distant relatives. I'd chosen a seat near the back, hoping to be inconspicuous. No such luck. Aidan continued, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "Most of us here understand the joy, the purpose, that comes with having children, with building a legacy." He looked directly at me, his smile tightening. "And then there's my sister, Tessa." A nervous titter went through some of the guests. I felt my cheeks begin to burn. "Brilliant, of course," he conceded with a magnanimous wave of his hand. "Off doing, well, whatever important world-changing science she's doing." He chuckled, and a few others joined in, a little too eagerly. But I look at her, and I can't help but feel a little sad. All that focus on a career. It's a bit empty, isn't it? A bit selfish when you think about what truly matters. My breath hitched. I could feel every eye in the room on me. Sophia was looking down at Sam, a faint blush on her own cheeks, but she didn't intervene. "I mean, what's the point of all that ambition if you've got no one to share it with, no little ones to pass on your name, your values?" Aidan pressed on, clearly enjoying his moment. "I just hope she doesn't wake up one day, old and alone, with only her test tubes and microscopes for comfort." He raised his glass higher. "Because that's a lonely future, Tessa. A very lonely future." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Then, my father, Jarvis, cleared his throat. "Aidan's right, you know," he said, his voice firm, carrying the weight of patriarchal authority. He wasn't looking at me, but at the crowd. "A woman's true calling is her family, her children. It's what gives her life meaning." My mother, Josephine, nodded beside him, her lips pressed into a thin line of agreement. "We just want you to be happy, dear," she said, her voice soft, but laced with the same judgment. "And all this career, it's not the path to happiness for a woman. You're missing out on so much." The words, empty, selfish, lonely, missing out, echoed in my head. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at my eyes. I wanted to scream, to run, to vanish. Instead, I sat there, ramrod straight, my hands clenched into fists in my lap until my knuckles were white. I met Aidan's triumphant gaze, then my father's stern one, then my mother's pitying one. They saw a failure, a disappointment, a cautionary tale. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. It solidified into a cold, sharp resolve. If my career was to be my only comfort, then I would make it a fortress. If my ambition was pointless, then I would make it my weapon. They wanted to define my life by what I lacked in their eyes? Fine. I would define myself by what I could achieve, by the power I could build, far away from their suffocating expectations. I didn't know then, not really, how things would unfold. I didn't know that my empty career would one day hold the power of life and death over their perfect family. But when the time came, I was ready. My institute became my kingdom, built on the ashes of their scorn. Bowen Innovations. A little irony I allowed myself, using the family name for the very thing they despised. The years that followed were a blur of 18-hour days, relentless research, grant proposals, lab expansions, breakthroughs, and setbacks. I poured every ounce of myself into my work, fueled by a quiet, simmering rage and an unyielding determination to prove them wrong. Not to them, but to myself. My success was meteoric. I became a name in biomedical research, a leader in genetic therapies. Family interactions during those years were brief, strained affairs. Christmas dinners where my achievements were met with polite, distant nods. Or worse, my mother's sad sighs about my still being single. Aidan would boast about Sam's latest school report or football trophy, the unspoken comparison always hanging in the air. His life, full and meaningful. Mine, a sterile success story. Sophia once tried a half-hearted apology, years after the christening, catching me alone at some dreary family gathering. "Aidan didn't mean it like that, Tessa," she'd mumbled, not meeting my eye. "He was just, new dad excitement." "Was he?" I'd replied, my voice flat, because it sounded quite specific to me. She'd stammered something else and scurried away. I let her. Their opinions had ceased to matter, except as fuel. I heard about Sam growing up from a distance, a bright kid, apparently, the golden child of their perfect lineage. The narrative they spun always subtly reinforced my otherness, my deviation from the norm. They probably thought I'd just fade into the background of their lives, a successful but ultimately tragic figure in their family story. And from the highest tower of my kingdom, I'd eventually see them crawl. The call came on a Tuesday morning, almost exactly a decade after that christening. I was in my office, reviewing clinical trial data, when my private line, the one only a handful of people had, buzzed. Caller ID, Aidan. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity, or perhaps a premonition, made me pick up. Tessa Bowen. "Tessa! Oh God, Tessa! It's Aidan!" His voice, usually so confident, so smug, was choked, raw, with a desperation I'd never heard from him. It was almost unrecognizable. Something's happened. I waited, a cold stillness settling over me. "It's Sam," he finally managed, his voice cracking. "He's sick. Really sick." He took a ragged breath. They don't know what to do. They said there's nothing." Another sob. "He's only 10, Tess. My boy." I remained silent, listening to his pain with a detachment that felt miles deep. "There's this new thing," he stammered, hope and panic warring in his tone. "An experimental treatment, some kind of gene therapy. The doctors said it's a long shot, the only shot. They said it's being pioneered by your institute, Tessa. Bowen Innovations." He paused, the unspoken plea hanging heavy. "Tessa, please. You're the only one who can help. He's my son. He's your nephew. My nephew. The one whose very existence, whose christening, was used to damn mine, to highlight my supposed emptiness." The irony was so thick I could almost taste its bitter metallic tang. A slow, cold thrill, dark and undeniable, began to uncoil in the pit of my stomach. Karma, it seemed, had a very long memory, and a very precise aim. "Bring his complete medical file," I said into the phone, my voice devoid of any inflection. "And come to the institute, tomorrow, 10 a.m. I didn't wait for a reply, just disconnected the call and sat back in my leather chair, the silence of my spacious office suddenly feeling charged. The next morning, they arrived. Not just Aidan, but Sophia too, her face pale and puffy, dark circles under her eyes, and behind them, looking older and more stooped than I remembered, were Jarvis and Josephine, my parents. They stood in the gleaming, minimalist lobby of Bowen Innovations, dwarfed by the soaring atrium and the large, subtly backlit logo of my company. Our family name, ironically. This place, this monument to my selfish ambition, was a world away from the chintz and judgment of their lives. My assistant, Chloe, A sharp young woman who knew nothing of my family history beyond their names showed them into the large conference room adjacent to my office. I made them wait for 10 minutes. I pictured them sitting there, on the expensive Italian leather chairs, surrounded by glass walls that overlooked the bustling labs, the white-coated scientists, my army, my people. When I finally walked in, Aidan shot to his feet. Sophia clutched a worn teddy bear, presumably Sam's. Jarvis stared at the polished mahogany table, while Josephine twisted her hands in her lap. "Tessa," Aidan began, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for seeing us." I gestured to the chairs. "Sit. You have the files?" Sophia pushed a thick binder across the table. Her hand trembled. "Everything is in there. Every test. Every scan." I opened it, my expression carefully neutral as I scanned the first few pages. The grim diagnosis, the bleak prognosis, acute fulminant neurodegeneration. Rare, aggressive, and, as they'd been told, a death sentence. "The doctors at University Hospital mentioned your GRT-7 protocol," Aidan said, leaning forward, his eyes desperate. "They said it's shown some promise in early animal trials for similar conditions." "It has," I confirmed, my gaze still on the file. "In murine models. We're not yet in human trials. It's entirely experimental." I looked up, meeting each of their gazes in turn. Aidan, stripped of his usual arrogance, looked like a broken man. Sophia was openly weeping now, silent tears streaming down her face. My father looked lost. My mother just looked terrified. "We know it's experimental," Sophia whispered, her voice thick with tears. "But it's all we have. He's deteriorating so fast, Tessa. Please." She reached across the table, her hand outstretched as if to touch mine, then seemed to think better of it and pulled back. "He's your nephew. He's such a good boy. He doesn't deserve this." "No child deserves this," I said, my voice level. "The GRT-7 protocol is complex. It involves harvesting and genetically modifying the patient's own stem cells, then reintroducing them. The risks are substantial. Neuroinflammation, cytokine storms, potential for off-target genetic effects we can't yet predict. And, of course, there's no guarantee of efficacy." Jarvis finally spoke, his voice gravelly. Money isn't an object, Tessa. We'll pay whatever it costs. We'll sell the house, anything. The treatment itself, if we were to proceed on a compassionate use basis, is astronomically expensive," I stated, watching his face. "The raw materials, the specialized equipment, the round-the-clock monitoring by top-tier specialists. Bowen Innovations is a research institute, not a hospital. We are not subsidized for this kind of individual intervention. We're talking millions up front." Aidan flinched as if struck. Sophia let out a small, choked sob. Even my father, who always prided himself on his financial stability, looked shaken. "We understand," Aidan said, his voice barely a whisper. "We'll find it. We'll do whatever it takes." "He's our grandson," Josephine added, her voice trembling. "Our only grandson." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, appealing to a familial bond I felt they had severed and salted long ago. "Tessa, please, for the family." I closed the binder slowly. The silence in the room was thick with their desperation, their fear, their dawning realization of just how much power I now held. I let it stretch, watching them squirm under the weight of it. They had come to my kingdom, these architects of my deepest wound, as supplicants. Their perfect family, their precious lineage, was now entirely at the mercy of the empty, selfish woman they had so publicly condemned. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm, almost clinical. "I'll need to review his case thoroughly with my team. Dr. Nelson Taylor, my chief neurologist, will need to examine all this data." I tapped the binder. "And then," I paused, letting my gaze drift over each of them, lingering for a moment on Aiden's ravaged face. "We can discuss my requirements." The unspoken threat, the implication of conditions beyond mere payment, hung heavy in the sterile air of the conference room. Aiden's eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. Sophia stopped crying, a new kind of fear dawning on her face. My parents just stared, their hope now visibly tainted with dread. The price of a miracle, I thought, was about to be set, and I would be the one to name it. I let them stew for 2 days. 2 days for the weight of my unspoken conditions to press down on them, for their desperation to ripen. Dr. Taylor, my trusted colleague, and a man who knew the bare bones of my family's past disdain for my life's work, reviewed Sam's files with grim diligence. "It's aggressive, Tessa," he confirmed, his brow furrowed. "The GRT-7 is a Hail Mary, but it's the only Hail Mary they've got. The science is sound, theoretically. The risk, however, is off the charts." "I'm aware," I'd replied. "Prepare a full risk-benefit analysis and clear my schedule for Friday morning. I'll be meeting with the family again." On Friday, I summoned them not to the impersonal conference room, but to my office, my sanctuary. The room was large, with one wall of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city, a view I'd earned. My desk was a slab of polished black granite, imposing and uncluttered. When Aiden, Sophia, Jarvis, and Josephine were ushered in, they looked even more diminished than before. Sophia's eyes were red-rimmed, Aiden's jaw tight with anxiety. This time, they weren't alone. Beside me sat Quinn Adams, my lawyer. Quinn was sharp, impeccably dressed, and possessed a gaze that could make concrete sweat. Her presence alone shifted the atmosphere from a desperate family plea to a formal, high-stakes negotiation. "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the chairs opposite my desk. They sat, a huddled, anxious quartet. "We've reviewed Sam's case in detail," I began, my tone all business. "Dr. Taylor concurs with the initial diagnosis and the extreme rarity and aggression of the disorder. He also agrees that, while highly experimental and carrying significant risks, the GRT-7 protocol represents the only potential therapeutic avenue currently conceivable." A collective sigh of relief, fragile and premature, went through them. Sophia reached for Aiden's hand. "However," I continued, and the hope in their eyes flickered, "Bowen Innovations is a research facility. Allocating the resources for a single compassionate use case of this magnitude, an unproven, high-risk therapy, requires extraordinary justification and, frankly, extraordinary commitment from all parties involved." Quinn slid a sleek leather portfolio onto the desk. "Ms. Bowen has outlined certain preliminary conditions that must be met before we can even consider proceeding with the necessary preparations for potential treatment." Aiden leaned forward. "Conditions. We told you, money isn't—" "The financial aspect is only one component, Aiden." I cut him off, my voice like ice. He flinched at the use of his first name, at the cold authority in my tone. "Let's be clear. Bowen Innovations is not a charity. The research we do here, the pointless career I've pursued, costs a staggering amount of money. Money that allows us to explore avenues like GRT-7. I paused, letting that sink in. "Therefore, the first requirement is a non-refundable research contribution to Bowen Innovations. This is not for Sam's direct treatment costs, which will be calculated separately if we proceed. This is a contribution to the ongoing work of this institute, to the furtherance of biomedical science, the very science you once found so lacking in purpose." Quinn named the sum. It was, as I'd instructed, exorbitant. Enough to cause Aiden significant financial pain, enough to force my parents to dig deep into their comfortable retirement. I saw Aiden's face pale. Jarvis opened his mouth, then closed it again, looking utterly poleaxed. Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's an incredible amount of money, Tessa, Aidan finally stammered. Just as a contribution? Consider it an investment in the kind of work you once derided, I said smoothly. Payable in full within 7 days. 7 days? Jarvis croaked. But that is the first condition, I stated, my gaze unwavering. The second is less tangible, but no less important. I looked at Aidan, then Jarvis, then Josephine. I require a formal written apology from each of you, individually. These apologies will detail your specific statements made at Samuel's christening 10 years ago concerning my life choices and my career. They will acknowledge the harmfulness and baselessness of those statements, and they will be notarized. A stunned silence filled the room. Aidan looked like I'd slapped him. My father's face was a mask of disbelief and dawning fury, battling with his fear for Sam. My mother stared at me, her expression a mixture of horror and a strange, dawning comprehension. An apology? Aidan finally choked out, his voice incredulous. You want us to write down everything, I confirmed. Every lovely sentiment about my empty, selfish life, my lonely future, my missing out on a woman's true calling. I want it acknowledged, in writing, legally witnessed. Jarvis found his voice, rough with indignation. This is blackmail, Tessa. You're using our grandson's life to— I am using my resources, Father, I corrected him, my voice dangerously soft. The resources I built, despite your profound lack of faith, the resources that now represent your only hope. This isn't blackmail. This is the price of admission. This— I leaned forward, my eyes locking with Aidan's, then my father's, is just to secure my consideration, to proceed. If Sam is to be enrolled in the GRT-7 protocol, there will be further understandings. The air crackled with unspoken threats. Sophia was crying again, but this time there was a new edge to her sobs, the sound of someone realizing they were utterly, hopelessly trapped. Do we have a deal? I asked, my voice a silken whisper that carried more menace than any shout. Or shall I allocate this potential trial slot to another candidate? We have a waiting list, you know, of people who value what we do here. The week that followed must have been hell for them. I received daily, almost hourly, updates from Quinn on their frantic efforts to liquidate assets, to scrape together the research contribution. Aidan, she told me, had to leverage his business to its absolute limit. My parents, it seemed, cashed out a significant portion of their retirement portfolio. The irony wasn't lost on me. The nest egg meant to ensure their comfortable old age was now being sacrificed to fund the pointless career of the daughter they'd pitied. Exactly 7 days later, Quinn confirmed the full sum had been transferred to Bowen Innovations Research Fund. That same afternoon, a courier delivered 3 sealed, notarized envelopes to my office. I dismissed Chloe for the day before opening them. Aidan's apology was stiff, formal, clearly drafted through gritted teeth. He recounted his words from the christening, acknowledging they were inappropriate and regrettable. My father's was much the same, laced with a lingering patriarchal indignation, admitting his statements were perhaps overly traditional and not intended to cause distress. My mother's was softer, filled with phrases like, "If I caused you pain," and "A mother only wants her child's happiness," but it still contained the required admission of her words and their judgmental nature. I read each one slowly, a small humorless smile playing on my lips. Barely adequate, I murmured to the empty room, but they had complied. The first toll had been paid. The next morning, I summoned them again. This time, just Aidan, Sophia, Jarvis, and Josephine. No lawyers. Just family. Or what was left of it. They looked haggard, the strain of the past week etched onto their faces. They sat in the same chairs in my office, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. They were no longer just supplicants, they were now debtors, bound by their first act of submission. "The contribution has been received," I began, my voice cool and even. "The apologies, while somewhat creatively phrased, meet the basic requirement." I paused, enjoying the flicker of exhausted hope in Sophia's eyes, the wary tension in Aidan's. "This brings us to the next stage." I leaned back in my chair. Bowen Innovations is hosting its annual gala in 3 weeks. It's a significant event for us, celebrating advancements in biomedical research and, this year specifically, honoring women in STEM fields. We have keynote speakers, industry leaders, philanthropists, a rather influential audience. Aidan looked confused. "What does this have to do with Sam?" "Everything, Aidan," I said, my smile widening slightly. "Because you will be one of our speakers." His jaw dropped. "Me? Speak? About what? I don't know anything about STEM." "Oh, you won't be speaking about STEM directly," I clarified. "You'll be speaking about me, and about your past, insights, into women's careers." I slid a few typewritten pages across the polished granite desk. "I've taken the liberty of drafting your speech." Aidan picked up the papers, his hand trembling slightly. Sophia leaned in, reading over his shoulder. I watched their faces as they scanned the words. Aidan's color drained, leaving him a sickly gray. Sophia gasped, her eyes wide with horror. Jarvis, craning his neck to see, let out a strangled grunt. "You can't be serious," Aidan whispered, looking up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You want me to stand up in front of all those people and say, 'This?'" "Precisely," I confirmed. "You will laud my achievements. You will denounce your past sexist remarks about child-free women and career-focused individuals. You will champion the very choices you once condemned in me. And yes, you will specifically recount your charming little toast from Sam's christening, word for word, and then you will publicly, unequivocally, retract it." "This is humiliation," Aidan choked out. "Is it?" I tilted my head. "I recall a certain christening where I was the one publicly humiliated. This is merely a public correction of the record. Think of it as setting a better example, Aidan. For Sam, perhaps, should he recover. And," I added, my gaze shifting to my parents, "Jarvis, Josephine, you will both be in the front row, smiling, applauding, visibly endorsing every word your son says." My mother looked like she was about to faint. My father's face was puce. "Tessa, this is cruel," Josephine whispered, her voice trembling. "This is beyond cruel." "Cruelty, mother," I said, my voice hardening, "is telling your daughter her life is empty and selfish because she chooses a different path. Cruelty is predicting she'll die alone with only her career for comfort in front of a room full of people. This," I gestured to the speech, "is merely an exercise in public accountability." Sophia, surprisingly, found her voice. She stood up, her eyes pleading with me. "Tessa, please. The money, the apologies, we did it. But this will destroy him. Can't you see that? As a woman, surely you can understand." I cut her off, my voice like a shard of ice. "Did you appeal to him as a woman when he was humiliating me, Sophia? Did you ask him to consider my feelings then?" I stood up, walking around the desk to stand before them. "The stage is set. His performance is non-negotiable. The gala is in 3 weeks. Sam's condition, as you know, is not improving with time." They were cornered, utterly and completely. The image of Aidan, my arrogant, judgmental brother, forced to publicly eat his words, to champion my life while denouncing his own past bigotry, was a satisfaction so potent it almost made me dizzy. This wasn't just about money or apologies anymore. This was about dismantling their pride, brick by painful brick, in the most public way imaginable. The 3 weeks leading up to the gala were a masterclass in strained silence and barely concealed panic from their end. Aiden, I heard through the grapevine of my institute, people talk, especially when the CEO's estranged brother is suddenly on the gala's speaker list, was a wreck. He'd apparently tried to negotiate, to offer more money, anything to avoid the public spectacle. Quinn, under my instruction, had been politely but firmly unmovable. Mr. Bowen's participation is integral to the collaborative spirit we're fostering, she'd apparently told his increasingly desperate lawyer. The night of the gala arrived, glittering and ostentatious. The ballroom was filled with the city's elite, leaders in science, medicine, and philanthropy. I moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries, accepting congratulations on Bowen Innovations' latest breakthroughs, all the while a cold knot of anticipation tightening in my stomach. I spotted them almost immediately. Aiden, looking like he was walking to his own execution in a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit his strained posture. Sophia, pale but composed, clung to his arm. And in the front row, as instructed, sat Jarvis and Josephine, their faces stony, their eyes darting around, as if expecting the floor to swallow them. I made sure our paths crossed during the cocktail hour. Aiden, I said, my voice bright, a predatory smile playing on my lips. So glad you could make it. Ready for your big moment? He flinched, his knuckles white as he gripped his water glass. Tessa, he managed, his voice a low growl. Sophia shot me a look that was pure, unadulterated hatred, quickly masked by a veneer of strained politeness for the benefit of nearby onlookers. Break a leg, I said cheerfully, before turning to greet a senator who'd just arrived. The preliminary speeches droned on, a renowned geneticist, a biotech CEO. Then, it was my turn to introduce the special guest speaker. Tonight, I began, stepping up to the podium, the spotlight warm on my face. We have a rather unique voice joining us. Someone who has, shall we say, undergone a significant evolution in his perspective on the role and value of women in demanding careers. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the audience before landing on Aiden. Please welcome Mr. Aiden Bowen. A polite, slightly confused applause rippled through the room as Aiden walked stiffly to the stage. He looked out at the sea of faces, his own ashen. He clutched the papers of the speech I'd written, his hands visibly shaking. He cleared his throat. Good evening, he began, his voice trembling. I am honored to be here. He stumbled over the words, his eyes darting towards me where I stood at the side of the stage, watching. Then he began to read. Word for painful word. He lauded my visionary leadership at Bowen Innovations, my unwavering dedication to science. He spoke of the critical importance of supporting women who choose to dedicate their lives to ambitious professional pursuits. Each word sounded like it was being dragged from him over broken glass. Then came the part I'd been waiting for. There was a time, he said, his voice dropping, his gaze fixed on the paper, as if it were a venomous snake, when I did not understand this. A time when I held regrettable and frankly ignorant views. He took a shaky breath. At my son Sam's christening 10 years ago, I made a speech. In that speech, I publicly derided my sister Tessa's choice to pursue her career. I called her life empty and selfish. I predicted she would die alone with only her career for comfort. A shocked murmur went through the audience. People exchanged bewildered glances. I saw Jarvis sink lower in his seat, Josephine's face contort. Those words, Aiden continued, his voice cracking, were born of arrogance and a profound lack of understanding. They were cruel, they were baseless, and I retract them. Fully and unequivocally. He looked up, his eyes briefly meeting mine, filled with a raw, agonizing humiliation. My sister's career is not empty. It is vital. It is brilliant. And she is not alone. She has built something extraordinary. He stumbled through the rest of the pre-written platitudes, praising women in STEM, urging support for their ambitions. The applause at the end was polite, but deeply unsettled. People were clearly confused by the bizarre, deeply personal confession. As soon as he stepped off stage, looking utterly broken, I had him, Sophia, and my parents ushered into a private room backstage. Dr. Taylor was there, along with Quinn, who held a new, thicker portfolio. "Well done, Aidan," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. "A truly memorable performance." He didn't respond, just stared at the floor. Sophia was openly crying now, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Now," I said, getting straight to the point. "For Sam to receive the GRT7 treatment, there is one final condition." Quinn stepped forward, placing the portfolio on the small table. "These are legal documents," she stated. "They grant Ms. Tessa Bowen full and sole medical decision-making authority for Samuel Bowen throughout the entire course of his experimental treatment and for a subsequent 2-year recovery and monitoring period." Aidan's head snapped up. Sophia gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. My father surged to his feet. "What in God's name are you saying?" Jarvis roared. "It means," I said calmly, meeting his furious gaze, "that I, and I alone, will decide if and when treatment begins, if it continues, if it is modified, and if necessary, if it is halted. Regardless of your wishes. This is to ensure no emotional interference or ill-informed pressure in what will be a highly delicate, unpredictable, and experimental process. My team and I need absolute autonomy to act in what we scientifically determine to be in Sam's best medical interest, or in the interest of the integrity of the research, should complications arise." The documents were laid out. Pens were placed beside them. My mother let out a strangled sob. "You want to take our son away from us?" Sophia whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief and horror. "Our rights as parents?" "I want to give your son a chance to live, Sophia," I replied, my voice cold. "A chance that currently rests entirely in my hands and in the work of this institute. This ensures that chance is maximized, free from distraction." Aidan looked utterly defeated, stripped bare of his last vestiges of pride and control. Their worst fear, I knew, was being realized. Their son's life, their precious Sam, was now entirely and legally in the hands of the woman they had scorned, the woman he had publicly tried to destroy. An agonizing silence filled the room, broken only by Sophia's quiet sobs. Aidan stared at the papers, then at me, his eyes hollow. Finally, he reached out a shaking hand and picked up a pen. He looked at me, his voice a raw whisper. "Will you save him, Tessa? After all this, after everything you've put us through, will you actually save him?" My face was unreadable. "Sign the papers, Aidan, and then we'll see what my pointless work can really do." Aidan's hand hovered over the signature line, the pen trembling. Sophia watched him, her face a mask of anguish, tears streaming silently. Jarvis looked like he might have a stroke, his face flushed a dangerous red, but he remained silent, defeated. Josephine just wept, her shoulders shaking. "Aidan, don't!" Sophia whispered, her voice cracking. "There has to be another way. We can't just sign him over." Aidan looked at her, his eyes filled with a despair so profound it was almost tangible. "What other way, Sophia?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Is there another GRT7? Another Tessa who can even attempt this? We both know the answer." He turned back to the papers, his gaze fixed on the line that would cede his parental authority. Quinn, ever the professional, broke the silence. "The documents are standard for high-risk experimental compassionate use protocols, where the lead researcher requires unimpeded oversight. They protect both the patient's access to the therapy and the integrity of the research program. Standard? Jarvis finally choked out. This isn't standard. This is monstrous. I met my father's gaze. Monstrous was leaving your daughter to face public ridicule without a word of defense, father. Monstrous was dismissing her life's work as a frivolous pastime. This, I gestured to the papers, is a necessary precaution to save your grandson's life, a life that, I remind you, hangs by the thinnest of threads. Aiden took a deep, shuddering breath. His eyes met mine, a flicker of the old arrogance warring with utter desperation. If I sign this, you give me your word you will do everything in your power for Sam? I will do everything within the power of medical science and the GRT-7 protocol. I corrected him, my voice precise. I will adhere to the highest ethical and scientific standards. That is my commitment. It wasn't the heartfelt reassurance he craved, but it was the truth. He closed his eyes for a moment, then, with a strangled sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all his broken pride, he signed his name. The scratch of the pen on the paper was unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He pushed the documents towards Sophia. She stared at them, then at him, then at me, her expression a maelstrom of grief and fury. But after a long, agonizing moment, she too picked up the pen and signed. Quinn notarized the signatures with swift efficiency. It was done. I now held legal sole medical authority over my nephew, Sam. The boy whose christening had been the catalyst for a decade of bitterness and ambition. Dr. Taylor will coordinate with Sam's current physicians at University Hospital to arrange his transfer to our specialized pediatric neuro unit here at Bowen Innovations, I said, my tone brisk, all business now. The cell harvesting procedure will need to commence within 48 hours. You will be kept informed of his progress through Dr. Taylor. You will have access to Sam, of course, within the unit's visitation guidelines. Sophia looked up, a new fear in her eyes. We can see him? Of course you can see him, I replied, a touch of impatience in my voice. He's your son, but all medical decisions, all discussions regarding his treatment plan will come through me or Dr. Taylor, as per the agreement. They left the room like ghosts, Aiden and Sophia supporting each other, my parents trailing behind them, looking utterly bereft. Quinn gathered the signed documents. Everything is in order, Tessa. Good, I said, turning to look out the window at the city lights. The gala was winding down, the distant sound of music and laughter, a strange counterpoint to the raw, brutal transaction that had just occurred. Dr. Taylor approached me. Tessa, are you sure about this? The pressure, the personal involvement. Nelson, I said, turning to face him, I've been preparing for this, in one way or another, for 10 years. Sam will get the best care, the best science this institute can offer. That, I promise you. And I would deliver on that promise, not for them, not even entirely for Sam, but for the integrity of my work, the work they had so thoroughly, so publicly despised. My pointless career was about to attempt a miracle. Or it would fail, and they would have to live with the knowledge that their last hope lay in the hands they had once so callously slapped away. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Sam was transferred to Bowen Innovations. He was a small, pale boy, his eyes too large for his thin face, a shadow of the robust child I vaguely remembered from years ago. He was weak, his neurological decline evident, but he managed a faint smile when Sophia smoothed his hair. I observed him from a distance initially, through the observation window of his sterile room, while Dr. Taylor and his team conducted their initial assessments. The cell harvesting was a delicate procedure. Aiden and Sophia waited in a private lounge, their faces etched with anxiety. I didn't join them. My place was in the lab, overseeing the initial stages of the GRT7 protocol, the isolation and genetic reprogramming of Sam's own cells. This was my domain, my kingdom. Here, I was in absolute control, not just of the science, but of their hope. The waiting period, as the cells were cultured and prepared for reinfusion, was tense. Days stretched into a week. I was professional, detached in my interactions with Aidan and Sophia when I provided brief, factual updates. They were subdued, almost deferential. The fight had gone out of them, replaced by a fragile, desperate hope that was almost painful to witness. They asked few questions, accepted my pronouncements without argument. They had signed away their right to question, to demand. They had only the right to wait and to pray. And I, the woman they had once dismissed as empty and selfish, held the fate of their world in my hands. The irony was a constant, bitter companion. The day of Sam's reinfusion arrived cloaked in a heavy silence. The specialized pediatric neuro unit was on high alert. Dr. Taylor and I stood in the observation room, watching as the lead pediatric neurologist, Dr. Ramirez, a woman whose calm competence I deeply respected, oversaw the procedure. Aidan and Sophia were in the room with Sam, gowned and masked, holding his small hands. My parents were in the family lounge, too overwrought, apparently, to witness this critical stage. The genetically modified cells, Sam's own cells now carrying the potential for repair, dripped slowly into his IV line. It was an anticlimactic visual for such a high-stakes gamble. Hours passed. Sam remained stable, but there was no immediate, miraculous change. This wasn't a movie. This was painstaking, unpredictable science. The days that followed were a roller coaster. Sam developed a fever, a common reaction, but terrifying for Aidan and Sophia. "Is this normal?" Sophia asked me, her voice trembling during one of my brief visits to his room. "It's a known potential side effect of the cellular reintroduction, an inflammatory response," I explained, keeping my tone neutral, professional. "We're monitoring him closely and managing it with supportive care. But he'll be okay?" Aidan pressed, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. "We are doing everything indicated by the protocol and his current clinical status," I replied, offering no false comfort. This was part of the control I now wielded, the power to give or withhold reassurance. There were small victories, a slight improvement in his reflex tests, a day when he seemed more alert, even managing a weak joke with his father. Aidan and Sophia clung to these moments like drowning sailors to driftwood. Then, there were setbacks. A spike in his intracranial pressure that required urgent intervention. Sleepless nights for my team, and for his parents. Throughout it all, I was the ultimate authority. Dr. Ramirez would consult with me, present options, but the final decision was always mine. "Do we increase the immunosuppressants, Tessa? His CSF protein is still elevated. What's our next step if it doesn't come down by morning?" I made the calls, coolly, rationally, based on the data, on the science. Aidan and Sophia watched from the sidelines, their faces a mixture of hope and helpless anguish. They had to trust me, the woman they had every reason to despise. One evening, about 3 weeks into the post-infusion period, Sophia found me alone in the small doctor's lounge, reviewing Sam's latest scans. She hesitated in the doorway. Can I talk to you, Tessa?" I looked up. "If it's about Sam's medical condition, Dr. Ramirez or Dr. Taylor can—" "No, it's not just that." She stepped inside, perching on the edge of a worn armchair. She looked exhausted, but there was a new, fragile strength in her eyes. "I wanted to say thank you for what you're doing. For Sam." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm doing my job, Sophia, fulfilling the terms of our agreement." No, she said, shaking her head. It's more than that. I see how hard you and your team are working. I see you care about the outcome. I didn't reply. Did I care? Of course, I cared about the success of the protocol. My institute's reputation, my life's work, was on the line. And Sam, he was an innocent, a child caught in the crossfire of adult bitterness. It was impossible not to feel something for the small, struggling boy. Aiden, he's a proud man, Sophia continued, her voice soft. What he did, what he said all those years ago, it was wrong, so wrong. And what you've asked of us, it's been hard, harder than you can imagine. Oh, I think I can imagine, Sophia, I said, a touch of the old bitterness creeping into my voice. She flinched but pressed on. But watching you now, watching you fight for him, I just wanted you to know. We see it. Her words, unexpectedly, pricked at something deep inside me, a place I thought had long since turned to stone. I quickly suppressed it. The GRT7 protocol is showing some early positive markers, I said, shifting back to professional detachment. His inflammatory markers are down. There's a slight, very slight, but measurable improvement in nerve conduction velocity in the preliminary tests. It's too early to call it a success. Far too early. But it's not a failure. Not yet. A single tear traced a path down Sophia's cheek. Thank you, she whispered again, for that hope. The next month was a slow, arduous climb. There were more ups and downs, more scares, more moments when Aiden and Sophia looked at me with that desperate, pleading hope. But gradually, painstakingly, Sam began to improve. The tremors in his hands lessened. He started to regain some of his lost strength. His speech, once slurred and weak, became clearer. One afternoon, I walked into his room. He was sitting up in bed, attempting a complicated Lego structure with Aiden. He looked up as I entered and gave me a small, shy smile. Hi, Aunt Tessa, he said, his voice surprisingly clear. Aunt Tessa. He hadn't called me that in years. Aiden looked at me, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Gratitude, yes, but something else too. Or perhaps the dawning, permanent understanding of the power I wielded. The latest scans are encouraging, Sam, I said, keeping my voice even. The lesions show signs of regression. Does that mean I'm getting better? He asked, his eyes wide. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It means, Sam, that my pointless work might just be doing some good after all. I glanced at Aiden, whose face was a complex mask of relief and remembered shame. The price of this miracle was being paid, in full, by all of us. The day Sam walked out of Bowen Innovations, leaning only slightly on Aiden for support, was a crisp autumn afternoon. He was thinner, still pale, but his eyes were bright, and the devastating neurological decline had been, against all odds, arrested and even partially reversed. He wasn't the boy he was before the illness struck, not entirely. The GRT7 protocol, while miraculous, had left its mark. A slight, permanent tremor in his left hand, a subtle reminder of the precipice from which he'd been pulled, and, as later tests would confirm, he would be sterile. A cruel, karmic echo of their obsession with lineage, a detail I chose not to share with them just yet. That would be a private burden for Sam to carry or share when he was older. Sophia was crying, openly, and without shame, hugging Dr. Ramirez, and then, hesitantly, me. Thank you, Tessa, she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. There are no words. The protocol was successful, I stated, my voice neutral. Sam will require ongoing monitoring, and there's a strict regimen of supportive therapies he must adhere to. My team will coordinate with his local pediatric neurologist. I handed Aiden a comprehensive file. Everything he needs is in here. Aiden took the file, his hand brushing mine. He looked at me, his eyes holding a complex mixture of gratitude, shame, and a weary understanding. Tessa, he struggled for words. What we did to you. What I said. There's no excuse. And what you've done for Sam, it doesn't erase that, but... No, it doesn't, I agreed, my gaze steady. It doesn't erase anything, Aiden. For any of us. My parents stood a little apart, watching. Josephine looked like she wanted to say something, to bridge the chasm that had opened between us, but the words wouldn't come. Jarvis just nodded, a curt, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. The old patriarchal certainty was gone, replaced by a quiet, bewildered respect. As they prepared to leave, Sam turned back to me. He held out a slightly crumpled piece of paper. This is for you, Aunt Tessa. I took it. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bright crayons, of a stick figure in a lab coat with wild curly hair, standing next to a smaller stick figure in a hospital bed. Above them, a giant, smiling sun. Thank you, Sam, I said, my voice softer than I intended. It's very good. He beamed. Dr. Ramirez said you're like a superhero. I managed a small smile. Not quite, Sam. Just a scientist. I watched them walk away. Aiden's arm around Sam, Sophia on his other side. A family, battered and bruised, but still a family. Their relationship with me was irrevocably altered. The old dynamics were shattered, replaced by a new, uneasy understanding built on debt, gratitude, and the undeniable, life-altering power of my pointless career. Later that week, Dr. Taylor found me in my office, staring out at the city. He's a lucky boy, Nelson said quietly. And you, Tessa? You pulled off the impossible. The science was sound, I replied, turning from the window. The execution was precise. And the motivation? He asked, his gaze knowing. I met his eyes. The motivation was complex. He nodded slowly. Revenge is a powerful fuel. But what happens when the fire burns out? His question hung in the air. The fire hadn't exactly burned out. It had perhaps transformed. The sharp, consuming rage had cooled into something else, a grim satisfaction, a cold, hard understanding of the world and my place in it. I didn't regret my actions, not a single one. The apologies, the financial toll, the public humiliation, the stripping of their parental authority, they had earned every bit of it. It was the price they paid for their cruelty, for their blindness. But there was a price for me too. The chasm between me and my family was now permanent, unbridgeable. They would forever see me as their son's savior, but also as the woman who had exacted a terrible, calculated price. And I would forever see them as the people who had forced my hand, who had made me into this version of myself. Powerful, yes, but also undeniably ruthless. My career, the one they had derided, had indeed become my fortress, my comfort. It had given me purpose, success, and ultimately, a savage kind of power they could never have comprehended. It had allowed me to save a life, to perform a miracle on my own terms. The christening curse Aiden had so smugly pronounced had, in a way, come true. I had my career. But it wasn't a lonely comfort, it was a potent one. And as I looked out at the sprawling city, at the lights of Bowen Innovations reflected in the glass, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I wouldn't have had it any other way. The price of their miracle was their submission. The price of my revenge was the quiet, unyielding knowledge of what I was capable of, and in the end I found I could live with that.